and I think it's time to revisit Romanian guns, don't you? This version is the extended cut I'm doing for the new Misha's AK World channel. There will be a somewhat shorter, well, it will be shorter, but, still a long version for the main Mishaco channel that'll go up later too. But this one will be the one I do a little more just kind of off the cuff and story times with, and then a little more of a streamlined version just to get to the nuts and bolts for the main channel. I don't know. Figured why not. This version of the video will be an extended So what's the point of this video? Well, honestly, it's just kind of nice to revisit Romanian AKs because we're always learning about them. The first time I did anything with them was around 2009, back in the old blog days. Then we did some collection videos in 2013, 2014, and then I did an update around 2020. With 4 years gone by, figured why not do another one? After all, I think after I kind of recommended the WBP and Zastava in a recent video over a Wasser, some got the impression I'm a Wasser hater. Nope, I probably bought a Wasser long before most anyone. But, gotta be fair. In this video, we're mostly going to talk about how the AK came to be in Romania, some details about it, a little bit about the semi-automatic imports, but not going too in-depth with those, answering some FAQs, dispelling a few myths, but again, trying to keep as focused as we can, just giving an overview of the AK story as it pertains to Romania. And here we have mine. That happened, oh well. You get it raw here, folks. These are kind of my 5 primary Romy AKs, although we'll look at a couple of others in the video too, not just these. And these are the ones that I've really decided to keep over the years and whatnot. But no, I really do enjoy them. They are fun, they are reliable, and they have a certain rough charm, rough beauty to them that either you appreciate or you don't. And that's totally subjective. So with that, before we actually get into AKs in Romania, let's talk about early licensed production from the Soviet Union and what they did. And of course, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support us get to the range, check out the link to Patreon. And she held it open. I think we're good. Yeah.
I'd hate to be a mole right now.
Yes. Before the Kalashnikov in Romania. Of course, Romania was closely associated with, allied with, the Germans during World War II and used the 8mm round, used Mausers, things of that nature. And they fell under the communist influence, that side of the Iron Curtain. And, of course, the Soviet Union would do a technology transfer eventually, and they would produce at the Kuger or Kugier or Koger. I've heard people say it every way. Every time I say it, someone says I'm wrong, and then this is the right way to sell it, and someone else comes up, it doesn't matter. I'm an American. You know what I mean. This is the city of the military arsenal there. Produce guns with Soviet technology, and these are 3 of them. And it's really hard to pin down exact dates and numbers, but it seems like the first was the Tokarev TT-33 7.62 by 25. Or as it was known in Romania, the TTC for Tula Tokarev Kuger. Otherwise, it's just like a late Soviet style post-World War II with the small, fine slide serrations. And it seems like production was set up around 1950 and lasted till about 1959 with 52, 53, 53 being peak years, 54 as well. Those seem to be the most common years, although I've seen 55s and so on. And this was the standard Romanian Socialist People's Army, blah, 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 service sidearm through the entire Cold War. In fact, they were not retired until the 90s and even 2000s in some instances. Goes to show you, they didn't really ever go to the Makarov. Of course, this has a safety added because of importation regulations. I keep hoping one day they'll do a TTC import with the dingus on the trigger, but so far they have not. And this one was actually imported by Colorado Gun Sales. This one has a phosphate finish, and the original finish was bluing. Okay? This is a refurbished finish, added much later, although done in Romania. The only reason I kept one of these instead of a blued one, I just thought it was kind of interesting. All my other Tokarevs are blued. I thought it was kind of neat to have a phosphate one. No other real reason than that. And we actually have a video coming out quite soon on Tokarevs and some interesting results trying out with hollow points, this versus Polish. But that's a story for another video. Next, in production by Ceausescu in Romania, was the Mosin M44 carbine. Now, this one's actually Polish, but very similar, late Soviet style, beechwood furniture, very nice blued finish on the Romanian, just like the Polish. And those were known as the M53 or model 1953 if you prefer the long form. And they are actually the least common of the national production M44s. Between 53 and 55, Ceausescu only turned out about 70,000. Yeah, because again, in the mid-50s, this is a pretty obsolescent design. Bolt action, 7.62x54 rimmed, bayonet, 20.5-inch barrel. Again, don't have Romanian myself, but very, very close to what we have here with Polish.
Oh, ripped my shoulder. Okay. Jesus. Woo! There's something about them. You'll learn to love them.
That said, actually my very first M44 was a Romanian M53, and it was gorgeous. A lot of them you find today, it's weird. Some are virtually unissued looking. Others are pretty thumped up. And it probably just depends where they come from. The more recent imports seem to be that. But I bought mine back in the very early 2000s, actually before the Russians were available. You could get Hungarian, Romanian, or pay a little extra and get Polish. Well, I got the Romanian because it was almost as pretty as the Polish and was like 30 bucks cheaper. And, you know, hey, why not? Of course, later I would sell it to get an authentic Russian, which at the time didn't seem like a bad decision. And I can't say I regret it because I've had other chances to get Romanians, nice ones or well-used ones over the years, including the source where I got this from. The same gentleman had a very nice Romanian. Again, it would be cool in a perfect world to have every variation of everything ever made, but I can't. It's my job, so I have to kind of pick and choose. So I decided to keep a Russian, a Polish, and a Hungarian, and not worry about a Chinese and a Romanian, because, again, the differences are typically in the markings. It's just, you know, personal decisions. But it is a very uncommon gun. You will find them sometimes with mismatched numbers, and you'll even find some that were seemingly assembled with leftover parts, like, say, Russian. It's kind of an interesting thing, the M53. And our third Russian gun, and our final one on the table, is the SKS, and this is a Romanian one, known as the M56. Production seems to have lasted from 1957 through 1960. So only about 4 years total. And they did make more of these than the M53s, but not by much. Around 100,000, best kind of very rough estimation. And these two are a virtual clone of a late Tula, letter series. Actually, very nice blued finish. Beechwood furniture. Hardwood, I believe. Leather sling. Yeah, very high quality gun, frankly. And just flipping it over. And Romania would use these in frontline service for a brief time. They would also give them to ceremonial guards and others, and kind of the Garda, the National Guard. And eventually they would pass these along to other Combloc, Warsaw Pact-friendly nations. That's why some of them are pretty rough. But these were all just stepping stones towards the prize, of course, the Kalashnikov. I've actually had a few Romanians in the SKS. This is probably one of the top 2 or 3 nicest ones. I've had some that were pretty well thumped. It's actually pretty difficult to find an M56 in good shape or totally matching in America. And yeah, I like this one. This one actually came from a friend, former Army, longtime collector. They're pretty uncommon. Like I said, only about 100,000 made, and many of those did not survive the Cold War for one reason or another. So it's one of the rarer SKSs, even though you don't really hear a lot about Romanian. In fact, a lot of European nations didn't want to make the SKS. East Germany kind of got stuck doing it. Poland was able to kind of not do it. Czechoslovakia did its own thing with the VZ-52. Again, it's much like the Mosin. It was getting to be dated technology, especially with the AK out. By 1955, Russia was starting to not only sell the AK Type 3, but also even start to consider licensed production. Hungary, Poland, East Germany would be those. But not Romania. While Romania would make the M53, these clips just like to stick on that second to last one. There we go. That was odd. That was the Amazon driver. Usually they just drop stuff off. This guy knocked. I think he's new. Also, when people are at your front door, why do they hold open the glass door, the screen door? Like, I was trying to close it, not because I was trying to get rid of it. I didn't want the cat to run out. Eventually, I just had to say, let it go, at least part of the way, because it was wide freaking open. People. Anyway, video. Let's dust off the milled Russian. Trying one of the slab sides from Atlantic. So they made the M53, the M56, the TTC, but not the AK. But the AK did serve in Romania. They acquired their milled AK-47s or AK Type 3s, whichever version you prefer, from Russia. There is some speculation that they did do some refurbishing, rebluing, maybe even adding their own beechwood furniture. But no, the guns themselves were Russian-made. The only name I've ever seen used for Romanian service, aside from just, AK, would be AI for the fixed stock or AIS for the underfolding. They had both. But they were just typical Russian Type 3s. But when the AKM was released in 1959, at this point, now Romania is wanting to build their own. They have plans. All right. The AKM we've talked about in multiple videos, so I'm not going to really go into its details here. You know, stamped receiver, lighter weight, better control in full auto, yada yada. And it was adopted in Romania as the PM model 1963, which was officially its first year of production, although there are accounts of earlier. We'll get to that in a minute. But officially 1963, and it actually went into mass production that year. And interestingly, PM essentially stands for pistol machine gun or pistol automatic machine gun type, so it was classified, much as it was in other nations, as a submachine gun, essentially. 760 by 39, of course. I don't have a Romanian first, second year PM 63, but I've got my Polish here, and it's actually very, very similar. Like the Polish, it had hardwood furniture early on, including a palmswell handguard, and it had a blued finish. Now, the Romanian bluing was a type of salt bluing, and I can actually confirm this because I've had Romanian parts come to me straight from the importer that had leftover salt bluing residue. It's kind of like soap. What made the early ones more polished looking was honestly the final machining under the bluing coating. Otherwise, they produced essentially the same ribbed type magazine as everyone else. Different little nods, I know, but yeah. Now this one has the concave Polish pistol grip, and Romania would actually start using this same version. In fact, when you think concave checkering grip, you think of Romanian more than Polish. But early on, the first couple of years, they had a hardwood pistol grip. And as far as I know, and I could be wrong on this because data on Romanian stuff is still very limited, well, I think it was a type of beechwood. Also, the surviving kits I've seen from 63, 64, 65, the wood has more of a dull finish to it, but that could just be age. And again, pistol grip would go to a Bakelite style quite early on, and then the furniture would change too. And the blued finish would become less and less shiny, polished up as this time would go on. But otherwise, very little unchanged, if we're being honest, with the early production guns. I've had the kits, that's why I decided not to build one. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I have to pick and choose what I can keep, so there it is. Yeah, I did have some of the Romanian PM63 kits, stretching from 64, 65 mostly. I considered building one and keeping one, and if money was not an object, I absolutely would. However, it is, so since I did the Polish and the East German, that one just had to go by the wayside. And it was fine, but the kits were not rough, but rougher. And so, there you go. But it looks very much like all the others, with really only difference in markings for the trunnion, which we'll talk about when we move on to the next section. But I wanted to acknowledge the early PM63 guns because it is a variation and one that's often overlooked. And much like with the M53 and M56, the machining and bluing was actually quite high quality from Kruger at the time. SAR-1. Still works.
Good as new.
Yeah, practically. Probably looks about the same considering how these look now out of the box.
Pretty much.
And now on to the main event. My PM63 clone SAR-1 and PM65 Wasser 1063 UF. And we can also talk about markings and finish here now because, yeah, these are both imports and what have you. So, where to begin? And again, I want to give this disclaimer. One reason I'm redoing this video and updating it, when I first really did my original post, which was way back in the Something Awful days in 2009 or so, I gave the knowledge I had of Romanian guns at the time, which was still a lot more than I had years before. But luckily, over the last 15 years, we've learned more and more ever since we've had more guns to study, more parts, more imports, more people talking from over there. So it's all conjecture. Again, the records and everything are either lost or kind of obscured. We do our best. So if I say something that you have evidence that is wrong, I apologize. Please do share, and I will add it to my little list of corrections and things over the years, because that's how we learn. But with that out of the way, let's dive in. Let's start with the furniture. The 63 had a fixed wood stock. As originally I said, it had a wood grip. This would soon go to the concave checkering pistol grip. Different styles and colors would be over the years. And the bluing would get more matte. This actually has original, as far as I can tell, blued top cover and bolt group in it. But the iconic dong wasn't there from the get-go. Like I said, they originally were palm swells. But around 66 or so, maybe 65 late on, the dong appeared, especially for domestic consumption. But the palm swell would continue being produced for export and for certain units within Romania, for example, the Navy/Marines that still preferred the more horizontal handguard for their needs. You know, the benefit to this, it allows for really better control and recoil, but it also does make magazine insertion and removal a little trickier. Once you get used to it, it's not too bad. And originally, they all had the muzzle nut, 14mm threads, standard bayo lug, but later on they would go to the slant brake and other little changes. And originally they just had the fixed wood stock. In 1965, we got the first folding stock in Romania. And this is actually quite a unique folding stock. This was known as the PM65. It was adopted for tank crews, mechanized troops, and it was often repeated that it was for divisions in the mountains of Romania. So, yeah, why not? But what's unique about it, even though we have a AKM 1mm stamped receiver, this is actually an AKS Type 3, AKS 47, machined underfolding stock, complete with the really downswept angle. In fact, some claim that these were leftover parts attained from Russia or elsewhere that Romania stuck on their guns. Hard to say. A lot of it, again, gets obscured. And Russian and Romanian proof marks get a little obscured, too. We'll talk about next. This does have a blued finish. Like I said, it has the unique folder. It only latches on the left side with 2 points instead of 4 on an AKM. This is just a pivot on the right. And the very first ones had the palm swell handguard because it took them a little while to develop the reverse dong here. But by 67, 68, it was in use as well. And here it is folded up. It clears fine. The only downside, it's a little shorter than the fixed stock as well. And I had to do that because otherwise mag exchanges would be quite difficult. A unique pattern. And the first variation, and the first time we see Romania do something a little different from Russia here with either of these, because the original ones were just dead ringers for AKMs. The first pattern of bayonet that Romania produced was the first pattern for the AKM. And this was really the first intentional one. The original AK, the mill guns bayonet, was really an afterthought. It was modified from the SVT-40 Tokarev. But in 1959, one of the goals of the AKM was to have a proper bayonet. So that's why it has a nice sturdy lug, ring, and they really wanted to make something useful. And they have a kind of one-piece pommel here. We have a grip strap, of course a sawtooth blade, curved point. This is the first that could be used as a wire cutter. And in case the wire was electrified, you have a rubber insulator. And somewhat unique to Romanian, you have this big belt hanger. Some used a smaller one, metal scabbard. This is known as the AKM Type 1 bayonet. Some prefer to call it the Type 2 overall. And Romania, along with, of course, Russia, where it was developed, and East Germany and Hungary, made this. So, pretty unique to the European Warsaw Pact nations. It's nice to have a gun with a bayonet lug. All those years during the assault weapons ban and the first Romanian imports not able to have them. That said, since they were welded back with Century, some fit better than others. And this bayonet is just one of many that came with washers over the years. I think the bulbous pommel is pretty unique. Even though I know they were made in Russia, it seems like the ones we see here today are Romanian, because this was pretty quickly replaced in service by a lot of other nations. I've talked about my SAR-1 to death, so I really just want to mention this 1063. When these started coming in, it was around 2009, if memory serves. And maybe it's 2008, but either way, the problem was they were kind of rough. For one thing, a lot of them didn't have matching numbers, not completely, because these were the early 1063s where they were using original parts to build them up. So you wouldn't have matching numbers because, a lot of the service guns had parts replaced over the years. Second, we thought they were really expensive at $500. I kid you not. When the standard one was around $354 on the high end, paying $500 for a mismatch gun, and some of them had some weird QC issues too. For example, mine had a really wonked up gas tube where it just wasn't welded straight, so much so that I actually replaced it. This is a replacement gas tube, just because it bugged me. But I am definitely glad, and I did pick this one because it does have the early style underfolding stock and then an appropriate dated trunnion to go along with it, because these would change over the years. That's a good segue to talk about markings. Now let's flip them over and talk markings. As I said, some do confuse Romanian AK markings for Russian, and it's understandable why. Both Izhmash in Russia used a triangle with an arrow in it, and the Kuger arsenal used a triangle with an arrow in it. And the difference is really just in the arrow. I mean, a triangle is a triangle. On top of that, on the barrels, some people mistake a Romanian barrel for the Russian barrel because of the Y in a circle-looking stamp that is very similar. There are differences, but again, at a glance, I could definitely understand the mix-up. So, yeah, I've seen more than a few people mistake the Kuger triangle for an Izhmash. Be aware. Side by side, I know you can tell the difference, but yeah. I should also mention briefly that there was the Carfill arsenal that produced smaller numbers of PM63s in Romania. These were only supposed to be for domestic use, not for export. They use a triangle, and some of them are reported with a small 11, not like the circle 11 used by FB Radom, but a small little 11. It's different. If you see a triangle and an 11, check it out. It could be a part from a much less common Romanian arsenal. Either way, we had two producing these, one larger than the other. One nice thing that Romania did do, they date-coded their guns. Most of your military guns have a 4-digit year code, like right here. Some guns, though, have a 2-digit year code, and it's said this was done for more export or even commercial. Although, you wouldn't shock me at all if you found a military gun with a 2-digit code or a truly commercial gun with a 4-digit, because there are no true rules when it comes to Romanian production. I promise you. But I did want to mention that. And of course, earlier guns have more serialized parts. Later, they would drop serializing things like the rear sight. This is pretty common throughout Notice how this one has no scope rail. It's kind of neat. Of course, it doesn't have mag wheel dimples either. And so in the late 60s, we will have the forearm vertical for most of the Romanian military, although not all. And some guns start to get the slant style muzzle brake, either from the factory or added during a repair refurbishment. And the finish continues to get a little kind of duller looking. Some have called it black oxide, but I think it was just still salt blue, although later on phosphating will appear. And in the 70s, we'll see some other changes. One of the earliest, in the early 70s to mid, the underfolding stock. Like I said, this one is the early machine style. Then there would be a transitional machine style that's simplified on the inside. And then they would very soon go to the rather unique tubular stamped steel style. Those are cool, and that would have been my second pick. But I think this is nice for being the Russian style, and also the tubular style, while it works, definitely feels less sturdy. Yeah, I don't know, it just twists and stuff more than even this does, so yeah, take that. So yeah, the 65 started to see that economy by 72, 73 in that same kind of time frame. But in 76, we would see some other changes. As I said earlier, they took the bayonet much more serious with the AKM. And in 1965, Russia introduced the Type 2, or Type 3, if you prefer, overall. And this was really meant to be a large-scale improvement. The grip doesn't have that bulbous end. Instead, it has a metal cap. That's because that was a breakage point. The blade itself is more or less the same. But the scabbard went from metal to bakelite material. This would have been one of the early bakelite parts, or AG4 if you prefer, along with pistol grips. Have the same metal clip point. Because of the synthetic material, the rubber insulator is gone. This one here has a canvas hanger. And Romania was one of many nations that made the Type 2. Not only did the European nations in the Warsaw Pact do it, you see Yugoslavia, China, I believe even Iraq made these. It's a pretty common bayonet overall. I'm not actually sure if I grabbed a Romanian, but if I remember right, this did come with the Romanian Wasser at one time, this hanger. But anyway, that was the second type. I'm not sure when Romania switched its production over. Probably not at the same time as Russia. So you start to see this later on in PM63 and PM65 production. So I stuck this on my SAR-1. While I did thread the barrel eons ago, I never bothered to put the wings on the lug, mostly because, I mean, the way they neutered these back in the day, it's pretty easy to stick a bayonet on, just, for pictures and display. Unlike with, say, the Mac 90, where they took the whole block off. With these, they just shaved the wings, and even then it wasn't 100%. There was enough of a lip. Again, while I didn't mind threading the muzzle, that was easy. To do this, I would have had to pull off the gas block on the front sight, and I didn't want to. Here's the bayonet in its wire cutter mode. Kind of a neat feature. Chopper. So yeah. Alright, let's try this Legion AKM with the Russian mag. Not bad. Russia had already switched over to using some cast small parts in the early 70s, and really the whole process was over by 74 there. Romania would pick it up in 76. We see the gas block go from a machined part to a cast part. And some say that the chrome plating in the gas block, not the barrel, but the gas block, went away. These always had chrome-plated cold hammer forged barrels. The front sight base, which was the early machine style without really any lightning cuts, would transition to a lightning cut style, but eventually it would become a cast unit as well. And we'll see a cast rear trunnion appear, and you'll see the top cover changing over time, going from the kind of the smooth side to the side with the lip. Of course, this one has the lipped rear piece. Little changes like that. Most of these occurred between 76 and 80, although some might be from later on as the PA-86 was adopted. I think that's about the time phosphating at least crept in for some small parts too. And I should mention that Romania was absolutely not against using blued and phosphate parts together, especially on a reworked, refurbed gun. The 1mm receiver would stay the same. You know, mags and all that would stay mostly the same. Just cost-cutting measures. It's also said that in 1980, they took another step down, trying to speed up quality, so guns made after 80 can have rougher final machining on things like the barrel. Sometimes the stampings for the serial numbers aren't perfectly straight and aligned. It just kind of seems like things get a little sloppy there. Makes sense, and of course that can carry over to the finish as well. I should say too, as newer guns like with the foregrip come into service in the mid to late 60s, a lot of the earlier guns were transferred to the Garda, the National Guard, the Patriotic Guard. So they would get the G stamping, you know, the famous Romy G on the side of the gas block, excuse me, the rear sight base. The internet's going to love that. But, you know, that left front line troops with the somewhat newer guns, fresher guns, and gave the Guard the guns that were limited to semi-automatic. It wasn't a permanent modification. They just put a semi-automatic trigger group in them so that they could be converted back if they needed to. Let's talk pouches. Pouches, that's definitely one area we've learned a lot since I originally got into AKs, because Century would start tossing in free pouches when you'd buy a Wasser 10 for a couple of years there. All kinds of crazy pouches showed up. Some Romanian, some not. And here's one I got in one batch that I kept. It's a relatively uncommon pouch, but it seems to be the earliest true Romanian made. It's definitely possible that Russian pouches were used before, but this is unique to them. It is a type of leather with a very pebbly finish, belt loops, 2 closures, no space for a cleaning kit or oiler. I guess at the time they thought, this could have been before the underfolders were in service, they thought, well, the cleaning kit's in the buttstock, so who cares? And it holds 4 of the 30-round metal mags. And the mags I keep in that pouch are kind of unique. They have this little tab welded on the front that acts as a lanyard point. I had all kinds of weird things attached to these. This one has kind of a metal ring. This one almost has like a metal tie. I've had some with like kind of rope. It's said that these were done for training mags. I don't know. I could also see them being done for airborne or mountain troops if they drop their mags in the snow. The only other AK mag I've got with lanyard attachment that I can think of are bayonet mags. But these are very different. But these came in via Arms of America some years back, and I just couldn't help but keep a couple for historical purpose. Even though they were a little well used, they actually worked just fine. In a recent video, someone asked me how I keep my mags and stuff organized, and yeah, there's no real trick or secret to it. It's mag pouches. I do my best to keep mags of the same type in a pouch, and I try to keep any accessories if there's pockets in the same pouch. Just thought I'd mention that. Plus, I really just enjoy collecting and studying pouches. Alright, now let's talk slings briefly. Originally, Romania used a leather sling. This Wasser 10 actually came with a leather sling. I'm not sure if it was this particular one. This one actually came with a much later sling, the SARs did, but I put a leather on it to kind of make it look right. They're pretty well all the same, although color can vary. One thing I find kind of interesting, they have very flat rivets, and they have this just like bent over piece of steel versus a more ornate clip you find on, say, a Russian gun. And they're quite long. And they're pretty thick and heavy. Pretty stiff, too. We like them long and stiff. But I enjoy collecting slings as well. It's a lot of fun. And I have bayonets for these. If I have time, I'll dig them out and show you. So with that, we have the essentially machine pistol, submachine gun 63 fixed stock, and we have the submachine gun 65 underfolder. So that kind of takes care of our infantry's needs there. But what if you need more range? What if you need more firepower? Well, this is another area where Romania is quite unique. Let's clear the table and talk about one of my favorite guns of all time. AES 10B, first mag.
Good.
Rounding out the first generation of Romanian AK types, we have the PM64. And you would think PM would stand for the same thing, but it doesn't. The first would be pistol, Mitiera, and this one would be Puska. One means pistol, submachine gun implied. One means light, Sveld implying light machine gun. Yes, this is an RPK. I just want to interject here. I know I kind of didn't speak correctly. I said Puska in light machine gun, which is really what it does imply, but technically it is rifle machine gun versus pistol machine gun. Yeah, you get it, I hope. But again, I apologize. Upon kind of listening back to what I said earlier, I was unclear. So, oops. Well, this is an AES 10B, but it's an RPK in some automatic form. And Romania was one of the few nations to license produce an RPK. Other nations that made them either did their own thing to a great extent, like, say, Finland with the M78, Yugoslavia with the M72, even Bulgaria with its LMGF, but they stuck to some degree there. Other nations got a little closer, but in the end, very, very few would make these. Now, a lot would buy RPKs from Russia. East Germany comes to mind, but Romania was unique in that, and they would actually export these along with the standard rifles to several nations. So, you know about RPKs. 1.5mm stamped receiver, bulged trunnion, heavy walled chrome line called hammer forged 23¼ barrel. The early ones would have a muzzle nut. It just has a slant brake on it from the importer. In fact, I think the only nation that routinely used slant brakes on their RPKs was actually East Germany again. Bipod, although this one's a later style we'll talk about in a minute. Extended handguard, well, not extended, but bulged handguard. Adjustable rear sight, but not always. Standard pistol grip. Standard rear trunnion. And a clubfoot stock with cleaning clit storage. It's an RPK. You get it. But, oh well. And while any mag would fit, this extended ribbed mag was made for it, and these are typically carried 4 to a pouch, plus a large pocket for an oiler, and not just belt loops because of the extra weight, but also a shoulder strap. I actually kind of like these pouches for what they are. That was kind of meant for firing on the go. You get one of those, and typically for more sustained areas, especially if you're hunkered down with the bipod out, they would use a drum. And Romania did, of course, make both mags and drums, as well as these pouches. These are some of the earlier canvas pouches we'll see in Romania, but not the last. I don't think they ever had a leather version of either of these pouches, but again, I very much could be wrong. Oh, and by the way, these would typically use the standard leather sling. Got it out on its bipod. Before we talk about this unique piece for a Romanian gun, I wanted to just mention something about the drum. A lot of people think of the backloading drum. That was actually something unique to China. The European style is the top loader, and I actually greatly prefer these. They feel a little heavier dutier, and I actually find them easier to load. Slower to load, but easier than the backloader. This may just be me. They're also a little smaller, a little more compact in the gun. Had to wrestle with it a little bit, but got it in the Monster 10 paratrooper, so Fox is going to try the drum.
Drum, drum. I lost a spring.
Lost spring, huh?
Yep. Let me wind it.
Yeah, I kind of need to do that when it's not loaded. We'll take care of it. We'll just dump it and start over.
It looks like one just kind of fed back. Let's see.
Folks, this is why I like top loaders.
Hold on a second. Might as well keep the camera going.
Oh, I am.
Yeah. I'm done drumming today.
And typically you would leave the pouch on it, just peeling back the top to lock it in. Again, you wouldn't be reloading this in the field. You would just use it when you needed it. And then for reloads, you would grab your extended box mags. Some people would have two of these instead of a drum. As time went on, drums kind of fell out of favor across the Warsaw Pact. But in the 60s, when this went into service, they were there. So let's talk about changes. AES-10B, full throttle. Helps if I charge it.
Mm-hmm. You're good.
So the gun was adopted in 64. It was definitely in production by 65. Probably was built with some Russian parts early on, transitioning more and more over to Kuger. We see that with, of course, the PM63. My theory for why we see some 61, 62 Trunnion dates, they could be early Kuger guns. They could also be Russian parts, or even from Russian guns. Kind of what I mentioned about the Trunnion markings. Anyway, fixed stock. Now, when you think RPK, you think of the smooth, heavy-duty top cover. But, like the first couple of years of Soviet RPK production, the first years of Romanian used the rib style. Russia would go to the smooth side, and then Romania would follow suit a couple of years later. Interestingly, while this one does have the later windage adjustable rear sight, the very first ones had a standard rear sight, just elevation adjustment. Now, this carry handle is not correct for an early one. This is actually a feature introduced much later. But this slab side receiver could be. Again, like with early Molots, the early PM64s had dimples for the magwell. But around 1974, give or take, a few years after the Russians switched, they quit dimpling this area because this is already a heavy-duty receiver with a heavy-duty trunnion. It just really wasn't necessary and might have even have been a detriment. Instead, they started welding reinforcing plates in this area. We'll talk more about dimples later in the video, but I just wanted to point that out. The barrel really didn't change much over time, but the bipod did. Again, the first PM64s used a standard bipod. Then in the mid-70s, 75, 76, these adjustable legs were introduced. Little wing nuts. Pretty cool. But that was a transitional. In the 80s, they went to what we think of as the long collar. The first ones just used the Russian collar. In the 80s, they went to this long collar that has this double-headed nut that makes this actually detachable. Pretty neat. So we see some innovation there, and it would be in the 80s when the carry handle appears on at least some guns, as do different sets of furniture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So those are the guns that the Romanian military was carrying, especially in 68 during the Prague Spring. And in the 70s, they would start exporting quite large numbers. Rather famously, some made their way to the IRA in Ireland, although I believe that was through Libya. Iraq would end up with some, especially in the 80s. And, yeah, just a whole host of other things. Heck, even the U.S. got some PM63s and PM65s, and they used them for adversary training and just weapons familiarization. Yeah, Romanian AKs were among the first ones the U.S. had in large numbers. Keep in mind, in the 60s and 70s, combat guns, especially Soviet style, were not the hardest, not the easiest to come by. Before we put this away, and I'll address it later, but this is an AES-10B2. It has the same 23¼ inch barrel. Yes, I know, a few websites gave it a 21-inch barrel. That was a mistake. How do I know? I have other RPKs, and I have a measuring tape. It was just a website oopsie. No, it has a standard barrel. Literally, the only difference between the original 10B and the 10B2, aside from just, different manufacturing year and a few things that would change with that, is just the name. It was an import thing. That's it. The internet, once it gets a notion in its head, it does not let go. It does not. But anyway, let's move on to kind of the middle years of Romanian production. The PM63 and PM65 gave infantry range, distance, maneuverability. The PM64 gave increased range, suppression fire, automatic walking fire for offense. But what if you needed to reach out further? It's interesting because while, yes, the Soviet Union had produced the SVD, its own design, and it was purchased by several nations, Romania, Cuger really, innovated the large AK concept with this rifle here. The PSL model 1974, with usually just being called the PSL, P being Pushka again for rifle, semi-automatic, scoped. And while this was definitely built based on the PM64 RPK, this is chambered for 7.62 by 54 rim versus 7.62 by 39. And it's really a designated marksman. It's not a sniper gun, but it was easy enough to train soldiers on and fast enough to produce economically that they were able to give one per squad and export these to a lot of nations, including African and Middle Eastern. Just one of the guns I really enjoy. And it really can be traced back to 1968. Up until that point, Romania and Russia were doing pretty well, but things were a-changing. The Dragunov. Why not? Clunk. In 1964, Khrushchev gave way to Brezhnev. And the next year, 1965, Nicolae Ceausescu took over in Romania and would remain that nation's leader for nigh on 25 years. And in 1968, the Prague Spring happened, and after that, relations between Romania and Russia cooled. And Russia's attitude towards the Warsaw Pact members changed anyway. Not to get into it, but yeah. Long story short, they didn't want or couldn't get the data package for the SVD, so they set about designing their own equivalent rifle, and in some ways, they made something maybe even better. So the broad strokes. We have a skeletonized stock that looks like an SVD, although it's different. It actually fits a modified RPK AK rear trunnion. It also has a spring-loaded recoil pad, and then a steel butt plate. I think they might have been better off just going with rubber, like Zastava did in Yugoslavia, but oh well. It actually uses the standard leather sling, although this does have the, I guess, slightly more ornate clip on the end. It has the 1.5 millimeter receiver with a bulge trunnion. This is larger than on an RPK. It's more extended out, obviously, for the caliber. It feeds from 10-round detachable mags, complete with an automatic bolt hold open, unlike an AK. We do have a Kalashnikov long stroke system, although it's much extended to go along with the barrel. With the muzzle brake on here, it's about 24.5 inches, giving it an overall length of roughly 45.5 inches. And this is, even though it's quite a big rifle, only about 9.5 pounds unloaded, so not bad. As for the scope itself, this was known as the LPS, and there were several versions and generations. It was designed in Romania with help from Zeiss, of all things, and built in Bucharest. And the idea behind this rifle was to reach out about 800 meters, give or take, 600 for smaller targets, maybe 1,000 for a crack shot or larger targets, but it gives you an idea, which explains why the standard scope was a 4x24. Some versions would have tritium and other things. Again, there's different styles. And would it amaze you to learn that scopes are not my level of expertise? Because when you've never seen down a scope once in your life, yeah, what can you know? Oh well. And this gun is actually put together from an original kit in Romania. We could almost import these as is because they were semi-automatic only, except they did have the third pinhole, not because it was a machine gun, but because it was an out-of-battery safety to ensure that it would not fire until the bolt was fully closed, fully home. Unfortunately for us and the guns, the ATF decides that's the evil part, and we can't have it. So there you go. We have to have different receiver, but everything else is original on this, including the barrel, cold hammer forged chrome lined, all that good stuff. The design and development process for the rifle was from 1970 to 74, and for the optic, really went to about 75. And then by 76, it was in pretty full rate production, again, based on the RPK line, the PM64 line. And there was definitely some interchange between Kuger and Zastava, because Yugoslavia would have their own very similar gun, different caliber, but similar gun, in the M76. And of course, today you might know the M77 or the M91. All overgrown AKs, but it actually started with Romania here. And these do have a bayonet lug for a standard AKM bayonet, and there are two versions of the muzzle device. One of them is a single piece, like on an SVD, and another like this is removable with 14mm threads underneath. They made both. And then, of course, we have the mag pouch. These are actually pretty neat. 4 spare mags, spot for a cleaning kit up here because there's not a spot in the stock. There's actually a sectional cleaning rod inside because there's not one under the barrel. And a lot of gear for the scope and optic and besides. Yeah, these are really neat. And like I said, bolt hole open mag. See? Holds open, and even when you pull the mag out, it stays back, unlike the Yugoslavian version. Now there's no external release. You just trip a trip, and it goes forward. And of course, for standard AK safety, pretty well standard trigger, not really special, although these are serialized to the guns, especially earlier production ones, just for reliability. Standard rear sight, so you do have iron sights in case your scope goes down, and of course the scope is removable and meant to return to zero. You know the deal. Yeah, this became quite a popular export for Romania, an alternative to dealing with Russia, and while it may not be as accurate as an SVD or highly refined, this was something you could give to any conscript and they could pick it up and know how to use it. And 7.62x54R was still a very common round then and is a common round today, so no problem there with ammo. Of course, it took its own mags. These are not SVD mags, but that's okay. Typically, they supplied 4, oftentimes serial matching them to the guns, just to make sure they fit and functioned properly. So, I really like this gun. It's cool. Good God, is the PSL long with the blade on the end. Of course, they took a standard bayonet, although sometimes it would be serialized to the gun. And here we have kind of a unique combination that Romania did. Basically, you have the Type 2 bayonet combined with the Type 1 scabbard. Here's rubber insulator. Here's the smaller hanger. I believe the only other nations that did this routinely were Egypt and Poland? I don't know. There was only a couple of nations that did this exact combo. And there were a couple that did the reverse, like East Germany and Russia, where you had the older bayonet with the newer scabbard, which is kind of even weirder. But Romania didn't do that. But just like with the SVD, Dragunov, this took a stabby thing too. And, well, goes to show you this was meant to be an infantry rifle on top of a long-range sniper. I honestly don't know if I grabbed a Romanian bayonet here. That's not really the point. They're all, yeah. But I'm glad I went ahead and put the bayonet lug on this, which is kind of funny because I didn't on my SAR-1. But I think because it had this block just hanging out here and I happened to have a replacement, and because I didn't have to pull the gas block off. The fact that all I had to do was remove the front sight base, put this on, plus the front sight was a little canted, so I thought, let's go ahead and fix that while we're at it. I needed to pop the weld on the muzzle brake anyway. It is a muzzle brake, not a flash hider. I don't know. I thought it was kind of fun to have a bayonet on a gun like this, so I did it. And I thought this would be a good way to show you the interesting Type 2, Type 1 combo that Romanian got up to for a bit. I don't know what eras they made these. Details on Romanian bayonet production, well, would it surprise you to learn they're pretty scarce, because even about the rifles aren't exactly the most common. This particular one actually came from a friend of mine years ago, Patrick, who was a crack shot. Actually, kind of miss hearing from him. Not sure if he's still out there. Last time he communicated with me, he sent me a joke via Gunbroker, which I thought was funny. Gunbroker didn't. They almost banned his account. I'm like, chill. Gunbroker has no chill. We were just kidding. Either way, Misha, bro, if you're out there, happen to see this, give me a ring or shoot me an email. Just not through Gunbroker, because you don't need to get banned. But yeah, this is one of his guns that he did well with in competition, and I kind of think the earlier imports are neat. And nothing against the later PSL imports for sure, but I like these because they're built on the military, and they have the bayonet lug. This was one I restored. It actually had the band. It was just where they machined off the wings, so fixed that. And it did have a threaded barrel. I just popped the tack weld. That's what's nice about these. They are pretty easy to put to rights. Okay, Dragunov, prone.
Mark my target down. open.
These are actually quite accurate for what they are. You're not going to get 1 MOA, but, you know, 2.5. Perfectly, you know, minute of person, fine. And they were once very affordable. In fact, this was a gem. This was a hidden secret, frankly undervalued. You don't get to rarely say that, but if you bought some that were parts kits put together in the U.S., they were like $500, even $400 in some instances with just a mag. But even ones that came with the scope and were pure imports, at one time they were $700. I know we're talking ages ago, guys, but you know they were less. You know, that was a time when SAR-1 and Wasser-10 and all that were 400. These were 7 with a scope, 6 without the scope. If you had your own, because it's a pretty standard com block rail for a 7.62x54R gun. And they usually came with a lot of cool stuff. 4 mags, sling, cleaning kit, mag pouch. That's really what I miss about the Century stuff today. It's not the prices have gone up that really bothers me. I miss the presentation. The old Wassers, AES-10Bs, PSLs, they came in a communist cardboard box, as I have always called them, which I find charming. And they were greasy, and they looked surplus, and they just threw in extras. I remember there was a time when they were throwing in 2 bayonets with Wassers, one Romanian, and one Spanish FR8 Setme. Yeah, there was more than a few confused people about why the Setme bayonet wouldn't fit an AK, but they were just throwing them in. But yeah, mag pouches and slings. Today, you get frankly, too commercial-looking box that doesn't work for me, and you get just a mag and little manual, and that's it. And yeah, I don't know, just kind of misses the mark. But it's Century Arms, so what are we talking about anyway? But yeah, this was a popular gun for Romania, and essentially they're still in production and definitely still in service today because it gets the job done. And really it changed very little over the years. You don't see a lot of variations. They never did a carbine version. Those are just kind of fantasy guns. They didn't really do a folding stock version. And while the optic changed, it still pretty much remained a copy of a Russian PSO-1 type. They just changed the details a bit. And of course you could purchase these with 6 powers, but 4 would be the standard. Cool piece of Romy history from the 70s that lasts to this day and kind of influenced a lot of other guns besides, including guns in Russia from the Sega 308s and the Vepers and 54R. But with that, let's move in to the 80s. We move into the 80s with the PA-86, the Pushka Automatic 1986. So we're finally dropping the old PM designator and just calling this essentially an assault rifle, an automatic rifle if you prefer. And Romania is unique in that it's one of a handful of nations to not only adopt 5.45x39, but to make their own rifle system for it. Poland is another. The cartridge just was not as successful because, newsflash, the Cold War was kind of rounding up, wiping up, and yeah, it just didn't become an international success like 5.56 did, or even 7.62x39 before it. But yeah, this is the Romanian effort, or rather my SAR-2 converted over to it as best I could. And the story here kind of goes back to the earlier 80s and good old Nicolae Ceausescu's insecurities. SAR-2. Never
Old
fails.
Faithful.
Indeed. Fearing a revolt, a coup, an uprising, he actually laid off, rather forcefully, much of the workforce at Kuger and the Carfield arsenals. That was around 83. Well, rather his brother or brother-in-law did. Either way, when they got the workers back, guess what? Most of them that were returning weren't exactly thrilled. Many weren't there, and so they had new workers. And so quality wasn't great for a while, and people weren't really happy. Kind of explains his eventual end in 1989. But either way, they wanted to go to the new cartridge. But they didn't want to pay Russia for the rights to produce the AK-74. Germany, East Germany, the GDR, the DDR, already had gone through a huge headache. So what they did, they turned to their PM-63 series and basically just turned the AKM into a rifle able to fire 5.45 by 39. And that's what we get here, which is why it's kind of unique, amongst other reasons. So the front trunnion was modified from the AKM, the rear trunnion was virtually the same, and the magazines were actually scaled down steel from the AKM just for 5.45, and they did go to a new pattern of pouch, has 4 pockets for the mags, plus a large pocket on the side each. Kind of East German inspired pull-throughs. I really like these pouches. They're kind of loose and very forgiving. And also from East Germany, the new side-folding stock. I've seen some places say that this is an exact copy of the MPI KMS 72. Not really. It's definitely inspired by it, but it's, for one thing, internally simplified. It doesn't have the bracket that goes around the pistol grip nut. It's also offset a bit, and it has a push button checkered back here as opposed to the lever that you push down. But Romania wanted to go to a standard receiver and trunnion set with the new version. They really didn't like the fact that the PM63 and PM65 required their own production lines and you couldn't go back and forth. In reality, pretty much all the PA86s that they used were the folders, but since this is a standard rear trunnion, you could put a fixed stock on if needs be. To go along with it, they gave it an upswept charging handle, cocking handle here, so you can easily clear the stock. And the selector. Now, of course, this is a semi-auto, but the military version had a 4-way selector. Safe, single shot, automatic, and then 3-round burst at the bottom. Now, to let that go, they actually shaved down the stop here a bit. That's actually one of the things that isn't totally accurate about converting an SAR-2. This should be a little bit shorter. A few of the early imports had it, but it's pretty uncommon. And what's kind of neat about the 3-round burst that they put in the PA86, it reset every time you let go of the trigger. So you didn't have that issue of having 1 or 2 shots left over like you see with the M16A2. So a 4-way selector. Now the Polish Tanto also had a 4-way selector, but their solution was different. They actually used a very similar stock to this, but more of an East German style. On the Polish gun, this is just a safety. On the other side, that's where Poland had its fire mode selector. So it's a different approach. The benefit of the Romanian style, they could have a scope rail here, and this would become more of a standard feature with the 86 series than it had been before. Standard iron sights, standard top cover. And then moving forward to the barrel, while it is roughly still a 16.25 inch cold hammer forged chrome lined, you can tell the later production of this because of the lathe marks on the barrel. It went to a new 22mm, pretty unique just to this gun, muzzle device. And because the bayonet lug is here and this is a little longer, it actually gets the dimensions a little different compared to a Russian or Bulgarian. And there would be an accessory lug here. I didn't bother trying to restore it. That would have been used for, whatever. It was just kind of there as an afterthought, frankly, although later on they would use it for mounting a light or a laser. And then we come to the furniture. Well, besides the stock, that is. The pistol grip is pretty standard Romanian, concave checkering, although by this point they tend to be of the more reddish or orangish color versus brown. As for the handguard, the upper is a new bakelite material, AG4, and the lower started off that way, but it was very quickly getting broken, so they reverted back to laminated wood. The wood typically found on the PA-86s is of a lighter color than some previous ones. I've even seen some that were just almost straight as top blonde. This kind of depends. So you have kind of a interesting mix of a metal stock, a couple of bakelite pieces, and then a vertical. Also, the foregrip on this is a little different shape compared to the PM63's dong. Just little differences. But this was standard. Of course, got to point out that the regular Army pretty much used this style. The Romanian Navy, for the Marines, it's often said the Special Diving Force, the Combat Commandos diving, used the more horizontal handguard. I could get that. One benefit with this new style mag, which is straighter and shorter than the previous, it does make swapping mags with the dong a little bit easier. But yes, some elements in Romania would go to the horizontal style. And the export model, known as the AIMS 74, AIMS 74, would typically have the palm swell style. And again, most all would have this type of stock and upswept handle. Really neat guns. They really are. And they would mass produce these well into the 90s based on Trunnion serial numbers we've seen. And even though production for Romanian use is long over, they're still in service today. There's been a lot of effort to get away from 545, replace these. I understand why. And they're finally making headway after years. But there are still plenty of PA-86s in Romanian service. They'll probably get shuffled to second line, third line reserve units as newer guns come in. But this is a unique one just for what it is. When it came time for a bayonet for the PA-86, they kept on with the standard Type 2 AKM. Like I said, they had to move the lug a bit to work with this longer, skinnier muzzle brake than before. And to make sure it cleared everything adequately, like the cleaning rod here, just, to fit, they ever so slightly modified the design. And, of course, a lot of them could be, but if you try shoving an earlier one on, it'll kind of get stuck and not fully seat. It's kind of a here and there thing, but when they did this, they modified the tolerances to make sure it would work with the new rifle. And, of course, when they did that, this would fit older ones, too. I actually picked this bayonet because I thought it would match the color of the bakelite on the PA-86 better. How'd I do? I mean, you don't ever expect exact matching, but it seemed more appropriate. And much like with the SAR-1, I saw no reason to swap gas blocks on this. This is seated properly. It works well. My luck, I'd put a different gas block on and it wouldn't run as well. And I didn't feel like welding it up. It just didn't seem worth it. Plus, I'd have a bayonet lug, so what's the point? But I really am happy I got this done years ago, finally, after waiting ever so long. By the way, they also had an underbarrel grenade launcher, 40 mil, that would fit here in place of the dong lower. I really am grateful those PA-86 kits came in. Now, if only we can get some other rare kits from Romania, that'd be fantastic. SAR-2.
I'd be surprised if there were any surprises.
Yep. We have to remember that Romanian guns were the first 5.45 AKs we ever had in America as an import. Stop right there before you go to the comments. Okay, I know technically the first 5.45 AK was the Chinese 88S. Technically. Like 2 of those came in. Okay, more like 50. You know what I mean, though. Very small number. But if I did not insert this correction, yeah, people type. I bet you someone will still type. But, hey, there you go. In fact, they were almost the first gun chambered for that cartridge in general. The very first were those East German bolt actions. But these came very soon after, like the Romac 992 and the Mark II and the WUM II, the Kerr II, and then, yes, the SAR II and eventually the Wasser II as well. Not a lot of change in them, but there are some unique variations. But yeah, this was my first and a lot of people's first experience with the 5.45 gun, long before the arsenals and long before the Russian 5.45 guns came in. And unfortunately, we never did get a Tantal-style import. Those all had to be built from kits. I've told the story about converting this one. It took me years, and I did it in bits and bobs. It wasn't really until the PA-86 kits came in that I was able to fully do it. For a long time, I used a Bulgarian Bakelite upper handguard. I actually got this bolt carrier from Kvar back when they actually had Romanian parts. It's an unnumbered part to give the upswept handle. The stock was probably the first component I picked up back in 2002 or 3. I guess it had to be 2003. Push button style. So yeah, this gun's looked a lot of different ways over the years, and it's really been a lot of fun. A lot of fun project in it. A lot of 5.45 ammo down this pipe too. Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite guns. Almost as special as my SAR-1. And to go along with the new PA-86 rifle, they would eventually adopt a light machine gun, often called an RPK-74. Again, it's really a scaled down version of the PM-64, and we don't have any of those in America. Even parts kits are extremely rare. Maybe one day, but not today. However, this version here is a late production PM-64. Mine, often called the paratrooper. It has the smooth top cover, standard rear sight, proper adjustables. I actually keep a bird cage on it just for fun. The 5.45 version usually has a bird cage. And this is the type with the same folding stock push button and dong forearm. And if you think the dong kept a 30-round mag from coming in and out easily, yeah, imagine an extended one. You can get it in, but, you know. Also, with the 5.45 version around this era, this is when the carry handle becomes more of a common update feature. AES-10B. So yeah, with these late versions and all the ones that we've had come in from Century, and these are kind of like the Wasser 1063s where they're rebuilt in Romania on new receivers, but from original parts, they're all dated 1989, for whatever that's worth. I never have been able to find a different name for them. It's not to say there wasn't one. Things were getting a little chaotic around that period. But it's essentially a PM-64, but with the folding stock and the dong forend, what have you. And, of course, the semi-automatics have a scope rail. Not sure if the military ones did or not. I should mention by this point with the PA-86 in production, you do start to see some parts with a phosphate finish. At least much more common than before. And you also don't see the drum issued near as much. The stick mag kind of becomes the new standard. I mean, it does save some being folded, about 8 inches. That's the benefit, plus you have a standard rear trunnion. The downside is you do have this block hanging off the back, adding nearly 2 inches that a traditional underfolder or left folder would not have. These also do not seem to have the upswept charging handle, as best I know. Take that for what you will. Going back to the 545 version, I've seen 2 names mentioned. Either PM-93, that seems to be the prevailing one now, but also PM-89. I don't know. I think 93 is official, but I will point out one thing. They did have 2 different styles. There was one early on that had the PM-64's 3-way selector, safe, full, semi, and then they switched over at Qger to producing a 545 version with the PA-86's 4-way. I'm not saying this is truth, but it's possible those could have had different names or designators. We also know that they had a folder just like this, and a fixed stock version with a somewhat unique butt stock. It was a club footer, but it had a flip-up shoulder rest butt plate, similar to like what we see on a FAL-O, the heavy barrel FAL, or say the M14. So that I'd mention that. Well, I should say the M14A1. You know what I meant. So we do have some versions, but it gets a little murky. The 545 version used a 40-round steel mag, so not 45 like Russia and Bulgaria, which were Bakelite, and then polymer. They used a steel. So those are pretty unique, and I've never had one of the 40-round steels. I'm sure sooner or later they'll get imported. Again, the adjustable bipod was standard, and the birdcage flash hider seems to be pretty common on the 545 RPK 74 based 93 or 89, or have you even seen 91 as a year? No one knows. One day we'll learn, but that's one of those areas that, we haven't really dove into yet. But next, this is an area we start to run a little more about, certainly more than we knew years ago. So that was kind of the intermediate stage, from the PSL to the PA-86 and the later RPKs. Now we're going to get into kind of the late stage communism and the beginning of quote-unquote free democratic Romania. So with the success of the PA-86 and looking to kind of simplify production and make things better and kind of refresh the line, that PM-63 was looking a little long in the tooth. They decided to give it a little bit of an update and a new name, because as we all know, it's all in the name. And that became increasingly popular throughout the 90s. Go back and look how many things had the name 2K or 2000 or whatever on them at the time. They were just a little ahead of the curve. So they basically took this and made this.
Wasser 10.
No wire folders. The PM model 1990, PM90. Interestingly, they kept the PM name instead of going to PA for this. But all they really did is they took a 63, they gave it the stock from the 86. Most still had the dong forearm, but some did have the palm swell. And they made the slant brake a standard feature, although many later 63s had it too. And they did away with the leather slings and gave them the same green canvas sling that was on the 86. And that was pretty much it, guys. Internally, it was the same. The 90 did not have the 4-way fire mode selector or really any other changes like that you might kind of expect. I've said for years that this is one of my favorite AK slings. It's light, very flexible, easy to adjust, kind of has that cool military vibe. And this is what used to ship with the SAR-1s, SAR-2s, SAR-3s. When the Wasser 10s, especially 1063, started coming out, that's when the leather slings took over. And you just don't see many of the green slings anymore. And there are a few different shades and styles. Some, like on my RPK, have the kind of thicker hook, but these have the pretty straightforward, just bent spring steel hook. Yeah, there's not a whole lot here. It really was just a marketing rebranding. In fact, I don't believe the Romanian military ever distinguished the two. I believe the PM90 designator was really just huger. But hey, it's a side folding. This also meant they could end PM65 production and only be making one version. And one more look at bayonets. Here are the four we already saw. And I'm not saying they're all Romanian, but they're the appropriate types. The three main types they used. The original AKM Type 1, the improved from 1965 onward Type 2, and then unique to Romania, the hybrid Type 1, Type 2. And of course, like I said earlier, they did have to modify it slightly to work with the PA-86. One interesting thing about Romania, they never went to like true black polymer material. It was always kind of a type of bakelite. They definitely didn't do plum either. And as far as I know, all their mags were steel as well. I have a lot of fun in collecting accessories. Most of my AK bayonets came from Wassers over the years. So I rarely set out to buy them. Usually just when they come with guns. AMD 65. Up to this point, not counting the RPK and the PSL, our guns have all had the standard 415 millimeter 16 and a quarter inch barrel. But in the 80s and 90s, the intermediate length was catching on more and more. We saw the MPI AKS 74NK in East Germany, and of course, Hungary led the way with the AMD 65. Russia tried the AKS 74U, but that turned out to be a little too short. And so they ended up with the AK 102, 104, 105, but that wouldn't be until the 90s. Romania was kind of at the forefront, but not the first. Because they did work on short barrel guns, or short rifles, as they were sometimes referred to. And they actually do predate, slightly, the PA-86. Wasser KR. Well, we come to the PM90's little brother, the PM90 Skorta, short barrel or short rifle. This is, of course, in 7.62x39, but other versions have been made. And this was actually not the first. So let's back up, like I said, to before the PA-86 really was put into production, although I bet it was on the horizon. Romania never produced a truly short AK-issue type. Very few nations actually did. Their first effort at a little carbine was known as the PM80. It had roughly a 12-inch barrel and a very unique folding stock. It actually folded to the left and was a hollowed out tube with a folding butt plate. Let's try it like this. Years ago, I had some of those. That's one of the parts I had that came in with the bluing still on them. Or at least the salts from the bling, I should say. And I had to wash them out. It was like soap. It felt like Dawn's soap. It almost foamed. It was kind of gross. But anyway, it's amazing they weren't rusted out. They were from Century, and it was unique because they had the complete trunnion that would go on the back, and they had the full stock, but they had none of the hardware. So I actually had to get a friend, Hovermail, Honey Creek Industries, to make the parts for me. And pretty rare piece, and I really wish I'd kept one There is a long story why I did not end up with one, but neither here nor there. I had kept one back for myself, and then a customer got one and complained because he said it was bent. He was, frankly, a whiny dillweed, but it was easier just to send him mine than listen to him whine. It's amazing. I was probably 30 at the time. It's amazing how a 60-year-old man could whine. Yeah, we had other stuff. Every time I'd show him a gun that had an import mark, he'd always try to one-up me. Well, I've got one without an import mark. Okay, dude. I get it. You were around there. I wasn't. Just, be happy for me. And that was back in the day, though. That's why it's on the extended part here. But it was an interesting stock, nonetheless. The PM80 stock, to me, kind of seems like they took an underfolder, the tubular type, cut it in half, so it was only one strut, with a folding butt plate, and then they looked at the Hungarian AMD 65 and kind of machined the trunnion to match. So it would fold over to the left side. It had a 12-inch barrel, shortened gas tube and shortened gas piston, and then combo front sight gas block unit, and it usually had a bird cage flash header. Some were seen with straight, some had kind of a conical shape, not an expansion chamber, just a shape. And they were most often issued with 20-round mags. This is not a Romanian 20, but it is kind of an equally rare one from Asia, so I decided to put it in the gun. Another story, I did have some of those Romanian 20-round mags. You can tell them because they're flat on the bottom here. The ribs stop higher up. I paid $6 from Century for them and bought a few. I gave them away when people bought Dracos or other things from me, and I kept back a couple for myself to put in a pouch. Then I realized how rare they were because someone offered me $200 per mag. That was just money I couldn't say no to back then. We're talking like 2010, guys, 2011. So I don't have any of the Romies. The Hungarians are fine. I mean, again, it needs must and all that, but they did have some pretty unique 20-rounders, but they don't seem to be very common. You see them with the PM80s, sometimes the later PM90s, but for the most part, they seem to have stuck with the 30s here. And Romanian mags were always steel. Well, we're talking mags, so let's look at another unique Romanian mag pouch. This is the kind of the Romanian pouch people think of. The 2-cell canvas. There are lots of variations for these. They had 2 buttonholes so they could do either 7.62 or 5.45 mags. And I'm not going to say they're the only nation that ever did a 2-celler. But, yeah, they're one of only a handful. Typically, most nations used either 3-cell or 4-cell pouches. But these came with a lot of wassers over the years. I always kind of think of them as guard, like patriotic guard pouches that would go with the semi-automatic G guns. I have zero evidence for that, but it would seem like if your soldiers are shooting in semi-auto, they wouldn't need to carry as many mags. Probably wrong, but just thought I'd bring it out because we're doing Romanian stuff here. All right, back to the PMs. The PM80s were probably made in quite small numbers, although there are some photographs from the revolution in 1989 where Ceausescu would lose power and go live in his dacha peacefully until a ripe old age. Wait, that was Khrushchev's fate. Nicolae's was a little more dramatic. Anywho, after the success of the PA-86 and, of course, the PM-90 rifle and kind of following on development from the PA-80, we do get the PM-90 short rifle here. 7.62x39. And interestingly, these have the folding stock some of the time, but not always. Now, this has the lever style, which is often said to be for export guns versus the, the button style, but hey. But not all have the stock. Some actually have been seen as pistols with literally a sling swivel in the back. And I, years ago, had one of those sling swivels. It was just a round swivel that went in. And what's interesting, if they had the stock, you typically see them with either a palm swell handguard or just a slab side wood handguard. But if they had the pistol style, so no stock, then they had the dong style vertical handguard. And moving on here, there are different lengths of gas piston. They're all shorter than standard, but it fluctuates a little bit, as does the length of the gas tube, and as does the barrel length. It seems to go from a little over 12 to around 12 and a half, maybe a little more. Now, of course, this one, being a Wasser 1063 KR, has this extension put on, but the military guns could have a couple of options. They still had 14x1 left-hand threads. Here's another flash hider. That was definitely one option. These are actually scaled up for 7.62, so it's not a 5.45. But a lot of them you see actually have a muzzle nut there, especially the pistol version. And I'm absolutely sure many also had the slant brake. So kind of a wide range of handguards and muzzle devices seen on these, and even different lengths of gas piston and gas tube, although they're all shorter. The PM90 Skirta was under 32 inches with the stock deployed, and under 24, so under 2 foot with it folded. Again, if this wasn't here, you could see how reasonably compact it was. It was compact without having a super high rate of fire. 12 inches gave enough accuracy with 7.62 by 39, and they could use a lot of common standard parts, although not as common as the later AK 102, 104, 105 would make it, since they had the standard length gas system, but more so than, say an AKSU or M92 from Zastava. This is one of my favorites. It's really cool. Had a lot of fun with this gun over the years. Wasser KR. By this point, the green sling is the standard, which makes sense. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. How dare I? The rear sight. Whereas your standard Romanian rear sight would be 1,000 meters, the one for the short version would be 500 meters. So I mentioned that. Almost forgot. And it wouldn't just end here, because we also have another caliber, 5.45 by 39. They would, of course, do a version of the PA-86 with the short 12-inch give-or-take barrel in 5.45. The best name I've been able to find for it, designation, is the PM94, and it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Birdcage flash hider, different forearms, depending on what you need it for, I guess. The right side folding stock, just in 5.45, and it takes the standard PA-86 mags. I doubt many were produced, but they were made. They just don't turn up. Maybe one day. I've seen 1 or 2 parts kits over the years, but they're exceedingly rare in America, sad as that is. The PM90s and the previous PM80s were kind of designed for tank crews, special forces, guards, presidential guards. Yeah, people just needing a compact little gun. Not so much for airborne, as best I can tell. I could be wrong in that, but it's always handy to have a little carbine, and I think this is almost the ideal length. The combo block guns are among my favorites, no matter what nation you're talking about. Was a paratrooper. Me and this Wasser 1063 KR have a long history. As I've said in many videos, this version of essentially a Draco, but with a stock and an extension, this came from Romania as a rifle with this put on. the Century only seems to have offered them for a year or two at most. And I never ordered them in, and I don't know why. I think part of it is, by the time I had my license, they weren't in stock anymore. I can't remember. I only had a few come in, including this one, that were on their odd lots list or their U-Fix'ems. And this gun had issues when it came in. First off, it had Tapco furniture. They sold two different versions of the KR. One like this with the... Honestly, I think most of them had the dong forearm, even though that's not really correct. The Century and the wire stock. But others, like this came with the Galil-looking Tapco stock and black forearm, so it already looked bad. Some of the parts are just higgledy-piggledy. You can really still see it on part of the gas tube. It just was kind of a rough gun and required some work. I didn't end up keeping it. I actually sold it to a friend of a friend, and he had it and really did spiff it up quite a bit. Kind of got it running right, doing things. Well, then he decided to sell it. I met him and kind of bought it back off of him, and just decided because it was rare, I'd rather have this than a Draco. I've had Dracos. They're fine. They're good. But, I don't know, just kind of struck me as a little more unique. And it's probably a good thing I bought this gun off of him. And I'm not going to tell tales. It's not any of our business, mine or yours. But let's just say a couple of years after I got this from him, he ended up going away to Club Fed. It wasn't anything to do with firearms. So if he had had this still, it probably would have been eaten up by the machine and, destroyed or whatever. So I'm actually really glad I got this off of him before, things went bad. That's, it's just one of those things, guys. People long enough, bad things happen. He wasn't the first person I knew that lost their firearms rights, and probably won't be the last. But it's a neat gun, and I've tinkered with it over the years. And it's actually very reliable and kind of a crowd pleaser to shoot. So with the PM90s, we're at the end of communism and the beginning of the modern Romanian government era. And that's pretty much the conclusion of the Kalashnikov types that the Romanian armed forces used. But we do have one more we might as well talk about that was designed more or less as an export product because Kuger needed money. And I have now nicknamed this gun Snatch. If I did not mention Kuger's efforts to produce a 5.56 NATO 223 caliber AK, someone would have said something. Even though they really have not been terribly successful, at least not on the military front, not for the Romanian military especially. Romania officially joined NATO in 2004, and the idea was, of course, to have a common round, 5.56 by 45, and it seems like Romanian AK efforts were kind of based around the East German STG 940 series, the Uyghur, which actually explains why their guns have essentially Uyghur copy steel mags. Early on, the name PM97 was bandied about. Then there was a gun from the prototype known as the PA2000. There have been several prototypes and things shown off, including some that clearly took some inspiration from the Polish WZ-96 Beryl. None of them really gained traction, especially, again, like I said, with the Romanian government. Why? I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling it's that they just wanted to move past the Kalashnikov, maybe too little, too late, that kind of thing. But of course, we've had some automatics in America based on this from really almost the beginning. The SAR-3 was an early contender. Then we got the Wasser-3, which this is, of course, a more recent one we've done and had issues with. Alright, very first shots. We're going to start with steel case. Failure.
Yep, same feed angle issue. It's riding a little high.
Yeah.
And actually, it's kind of canted off to the side a little bit, too. It's like it didn't...
Well, let's see what we got here. Try it over again. Ooh.
We just had a second round drop out of there.
I noticed that. Kind of makes me wonder about the mag. And see, it did what it did. It's not quite going into battery.
No, sure not.
Do it again.
Hold your position there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, and that one's even angled in relatively correct.
Well, the thing is, it feeds from either side, so they do come in at an angle and then they meet.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that one's actually like straightened out and didn't go into battery.
Interesting, I just noticed something. Look at the back of that projectile. Something's dragging on it.
Oh, sure enough.
From the carrier.
Yeah. Maybe the mag is actually seated a little too high.
Or the carrier is something. Alright, we're going to investigate and we'll be right back. But they were around a few different times. There was even a version of the Draco pistol known as the Champion 2007, chambered for 5.56 223. That was around briefly. It was pretty cool for what it was. So we didn't get a 5.45 Draco, but at least we did get a Champion 2007 Draco in the small caliber. And before I was an FFL, even before YouTube as a website existed, I did own one of those Champion 2007s in 5.56. I wish I'd kept it. The reason I sold it, it wasn't all that reliable, but that back then I really didn't know how to get it running. I think today I could. Also, the mags weren't really available. They had just switched over from the Bakelites that the SAR-3s came with because of the whole pre-ban assault weapons ban thing to shipping them with the steel current production mags. Either way, it just at the time didn't really fit. And to be fair, it was not a military gun. But since we never did get a 5.45 Draco, it would have been the closest to a PM94 that I could have done. But ho-hum. Most of the guns I sell, I don't regret. But once in a while, I'll let one go and then really wish I could turn back time. But, so on and so forth. I never did own an SAR-3, although I had a couple of friends that did own them, so I did shoot them. I always liked the SAR-1 and SAR-2s. Keep in mind, too, when the SAR-3s came out, they were using modified AK-74 East German Bakelite mags. They didn't run all that great. They run fine with the correct Romanian Uyghur-inspired mags, though. Despite Kudra's best efforts, their 5.56 AKs just fell flat, and I'm not going to say they didn't sell select fires to anyone, but it wasn't a major thing, and even the ones in America, the Wasser 3s were imported in small numbers. The SAR-3 was probably less successful than the SAR-1 for sure, and the Wasser 3s disappeared for a few years, coming back, but for what they are priced at, I don't know. By the way, some of the Romanian 5.56s have a 90-degree gas block. Others like this have the 45. There's all kinds of differences. But, me, I'm a completist, so I wanted to at least mention those efforts, even if they did not extend to the military. And I have not heard tell of a RPK in 5.56 from Romania, but that could very well be wrong. So, there we have it. Let's wrap this up. Even though this video really isn't here to catalog semi-automatics available in America, we have to at least mention a few. Kind of the general broad strokes, right? And then if you're interested, you can check out previous videos I've done focusing in on this or that. Now, to be clear, there are no pre-1989 ban, which was the executive order, import ban, Romanian guns. There were also no pre-1994 assault weapons ban guns. For most of the USA, the assault weapons ban sunset in 2004, but in certain states, it was basically continued on. The very first Romanian guns came in summer of 1997. And the very first importer that I'm aware of was Intrac, who actually did a lot back then. But they would soon be joined by DIG, Dominion Investment Group, who was also an earlier importer of arsenals. Now, the first guns were in 7.62x39, and 5.45x39 would come a very, very short time later. And you have quite a list of names when you go back to this point. Kerr-2, MK2, they were the WUM, W-U-M-2. And of course, this would all be mirrored in the ones for 7.62x39. And configuration would change a lot. Some would be built from matching numbers, some wouldn't. Some would have half-moon cut receivers, some would be straight. But since all were brought over and sold post-89 and 94 bands, they could not have folding stocks, threaded barrels, bayonet lugs, and the like. And then halfway through 98, the rules changed again when the Clinton administration added to the 89 ban, and that actually led to low-cap guns coming in, like the Romac 991 and Romac 992. But then they decided they could open them up to take high cap in America, so we end up with the Romac 1, Romac 2. I'm very quickly going through these. Again, videos if you care to know the details. I would say of the Wasser 2s, the Kerr 2 is probably my favorite. But, hey. But then that year, 99, Century Arms got involved. And really hasn't let go of the Romanian brand in 25 years, a quarter century. And both of these guns are from the first century import, SAR-1, SAR-2. And for the first time, we would also have SAR-3, the 223-556 version. Huzzah! The SAR series is unique because they were actually imported with a standard magwell. And importation would last until the middle of 2003. And these were built from new condition parts. They came with typically one small mag, 5 or 10 rounds, and then one verified surplus pre-ban, so pre-94, 30-round mag. In the case of the 7.62-39 gun, it would be steel. In the case of the 5.45, it would be Bakelite, not Romanian, but East German, because they could verify those were pre-ban. And back in the day, the SAR 1, 2, 3, that was just the standard gun. Your choice was basically, when buying new at that time, an Egyptian Mahdi Misr, M-I-S-R, or Misr, or a Romanian SAR-1. But if you wanted a 5.45, you were getting a Romy. And very quickly, Century kind of standardized these, got them out there, got them onto gun shelves. The SAR-1s you could find a lot of places. When I did the SAR-2, I actually had to special order it because the ammo was pretty unknown and relatively hard to find back then. Almost as hard to find as it is today. And remember, again, this was the assault weapons ban, so we couldn't add evil features. We were allowed to have a double stack magwell and a pistol grip. Those are the features we could have then. But of course that would change at the end of 2004. Now the Wasser 10 actually replaced the SAR-1 about halfway through 2003 in 7.62x39. And the Wasser 2 replaced the SAR-2, and the Wasser 3 replaced the SAR-3. But the 2s and the 3s were imported in much smaller numbers, which actually makes sense. When the assault weapons ban came off, though, was when we could start having threaded barrels again, adding back the bayonet lugs, and adding folding stocks. In the very beginning, Century would add a Tapco style folding stock. It's probably just the one they could get, but then they would expand out. Now, the major difference between SAR and Wasser is, of course, the magwell. Much has been made about the whole dimple, no dimple thing. The reason is this comes in as a single stack and gets cut out. But your mag should fit fine. It's all just based on how they cut it out. There is a plate welded in here. And the whole point of the dimple really wasn't to keep your mag from wiggling. It was more to strengthen the stamped steel, because there's quite a large area here where there's not a rivet. So to keep it from torquing and bending, especially in a military gun, you, well, kind of dimple the steel. The same reason the top cover is ribbed on AKMs. You know, it's easier to keep this type of stamping straight that way. But I do admit, cosmetically, it looks better with the dimple. That said, they both have the XY stamps. Now, of course, people claim all kinds of stuff about how not having the dimple makes mags looser and all that. Honestly, there's a modicum of truth to that, but the majority really just has to do with how much Century cuts out this magwell. Sometimes they were a lot more careful, and sometimes they were very careless. I know it's shocking that Century would be careless, right? Of course, much is also made about canted sights. I'm not going to say that canted sights don't exist. However, in the military, for acceptance, as long as the sight can be zeroed, if it's shifted a bit, it doesn't really matter. These are tools. They're not meant to be pretty. Same goes for the gas block. Now, that said, I've seen some that are so goobered up that they bind when you try to charge the action. So it was always a good idea to try one out, rack the action at the store before taking it home, and also get out and shoot as soon as you can with these when they came in. I had one years ago that was so tight you couldn't even get a mag in it without hammering it in. And even when you got it in, it was so tight it pinched the mag, hit the feed lips, and actually led to failures. But once we, removed a little bit from the magwell, opening it up, it ran just fine. And that's the thing about these guns. We bought them knowing they might be a little rough around the edges, and that we might have to put a little work, elbow grease into them. But for $300, $400, we accepted that as just kind of the cost of entry. And that's a good segue to the next gun.
Wasser 10.
The original Wasser 10 did not have features. Then you had the GP Wasser 10, which had bayonet lug, threaded barrel, sometimes folding stock. In 2007, we got the Wasser 10-63. And these were basically refurbished kits put together in Romania. And this was done in part to get around the 2005 ban on barrels. Long story, not going into it here and now. But it also was done because, labor was cheap in Romania. The parts were over there, put them together with a new barrel receiver, semi-automatic, ship them over here. Now, that said, plenty of parts kits came over. Century actually did the GP 1975, which was a whole line built with a U.S. barrel and receiver using Romanian parts. So, both ways happened. But this would be the time the underfelders would appear, and several other kind of neat variants besides. And really, it was with the 1063 that the Wasser hit its absolute cheapest price point. And, I want to be honest, when they were good, they were really good, but they definitely required some TLC. As I said earlier, I had to replace the gas tube on this. The original one it came with was just kind of fugly looking. And of course, I put this on here as well. And I did pick this one. I remember all three stock styles came in. I'm sitting here thinking, in post-Sunset 2004, I believe this was the first underfolder import to be available. We had parts kits built. Century had the M70, AB2. A lot of other companies did like Polish underfolder kit builds because those kits were quite prevalent. I think this was the first import though. So that was pretty cool. And I picked this one out again because it's an earlier date. It's got a lot of nice blued parts. I really like it. I can't say it's my favorite gun, but it's one I'm happy to have. Originally, it just came with your standard handguards. A lot of time what Wassers would come with would be effectively handguards that had the dong shaved off, and then they would sand them. So they had a very matte slab side look. And unfortunately, like I said, the dong was cut off. It was actually quite hard for a few years there to find the correct reverse dong for an underfolder too. Oh well. And beyond that, the 1063 line would get more diverse and interesting. There's an argument to be made that the years 2007 to 2013 were the heyday for Romanian AKs. Not that this was their highest quality point. No. In fact, some of the lowest points were there, relatively speaking. But they were the cheapest and the most wide range of variations were available, including gold-plated versions. As I said earlier, this version was available in 2 or 3 different configurations. Its pistol version was available. In fact, the Draco was one of the first AK pistol imports because there were no AK pistol imports in the 80s. So that's kind of neat. And then, of course, we had the Mini Draco and the Micro Draco, which is just absurd. But again, we kind of knew going in we might have to tinker with these a bit, polish them up. But it was worth it. And you could kind of pick your favorite style.
AKs aren't accurate. Take 2. How is it possible to shoot all the way around that?
And the good times would end in 2013 when Century would kind of scale back a lot of things and restructure the line, some good, some bad. They never did bring in the Wasser 2 or Wasser 3 in great numbers, but they canceled those. There was also a lot of stuff because of the whole Colorado gun sales, M10 deal. Yeah, things got a little weird for a bit there. Just thought I'd mention that. But of course, they would restructure and come back, and in some ways come back better and stronger. One fun fact about this gun, specifically these handguards, these are off my second SAR-1. There was a time when they were still doing palm swells, but they had more of this kind of laminate oil finish. And that was a 2002 or 2003 SAR-1 towards the end, and it had a really deep, shiny, blued top cover. I don't remember what I did with it now. You know, over the years, things go, it got traded off. It was never as special to me as my original SAR-1, but I picked it up, and I don't know what I shipped it with, but somehow I kept these handguards all these years, and I kind of feel like they're very at home on this gun here. What do you think? Starting in 2014, a few things changed. The Wasser 1063, built with a lot of surplus parts, that was out. And instead, they kind of went back to the original Wasser 10 pattern of building them with new parts. You can generally tell because a military receiver trunnion will have a 4-digit date code, usually. and a civilian will have a 2-digit, or at least an export, usually. These guns also went to a somewhat better, kind of rougher texture phosphate finish, and the combination phosphate and bluing is minimized after this point. Generally speaking, these are considered to be higher quality when it comes to QC type guns. But this is also when the price creep starts to happen with the Wasser. It was a gradual thing, kind of like a frog in a pot of water. But beginning in 2014, 2015, 2016, running through today, they went from 400 to 500 to 600, now to 800, even 900 at some time. They've dipped back down a little bit, but still higher than they ever were before.
Wasser 10.
Now this Wasser here, I kind of kept as just a test and control gun over the years, and I set it up as a PM90. It's a 2016. It was kind of when the guns were still looking quite nice and what have you. And actually, this is a gun I decided to put on the chopping block. Not that it's a bad gun, it's actually very reliable, but I've got so many other AKs, I need to start moving a few. And this one seemed redundant. But in a perfect world, I wouldn't sell anything, but needs must. There was a time when Century did offer this style of stock on this gun, but like a lot of the other options, they've really narrowed down their catalog in recent years. And finally, the AES-10B. This actually started off as the AES-10, which was a light-barreled version, very much like the long-barrel guns we saw, say, out of Egypt years ago. But then the B soon came along. In the beginning, it actually had a PKM-style bipod, fixed clubfoot stock. But it really was exciting to get a true RPK import. Not an RPK-inspired gun like the Vepers back then, or a gun, well built as it might have been, from a kit like, say, a Yugo M72, but an actual import. And those were the fixed stockers. And we had a few different versions. We had some that were built from military kits in Romania, and we had some that were just totally new production, and kind of everything in between. So it was kind of fun looking at the trunnion dates to see what you could come up with, because I saw all three types of bipod. I saw the rib top cover, the smooth, numbers matching and all that. But the paratroopers were unique. They were expensive even back then. These were like $900 at a time when the fixed stalker was, say, $500, $600. We often thought that was absurd, but as it turns out, these are very unique kits. They were all 1989 dated, matching. Now, they did not come with the dong grip. They had the cut down forearm like you'd find on Wasser 1063s. I actually had to get this grip from Arms of America years later to kind of complete the set. AES-10B, last mag of the day. This is definitely one of my favorite guns of all time. I've had a little fun with it, giving it the birdcage flash hider, because the 545 version just, in all the years, has never materialized. But I kind of just feel lucky to have this one. It is what it is. It's a lot of fun to shoot, too. There was a time when I had a fixed stalker, but that's when I decided one of them had to go. That was pretty obvious. This was such a unique configuration, and I've got a Russian kit build, so there you go. But in a perfect world, I would like to have another AES-10B fixed stock, say early trunnion date import. In a perfect world, guys. Something a bit special, the AS-10B recently came back onto the market. Okay, yes, it's named AS-10B2, but it's the same gun. Okay, without the folding stock, it's got a fixed stock. But at least it has a cleaning rod. That's an achievement for Century. But, of course, like everything else, the price is not cheap anymore. It's a little under $2,000. Then again, with the standard wasser being $900 or $850, it is what it is. But it's an option, and it is just the same quality as the 10B, and the newer ones are built from all new parts at least, which, if you're intending on fit and finish, it does matter. There have also been runs in the last few years of underfolders. I don't think there's been one too recently. And they are kind of interesting because they have the Type 2 stock, the simplified machined, not the tubular steel one. Yeah. And Dracos continue to come in, although they tend to be sporadic, if I'm being honest. Oh well. And those are the imports. What do you think? Yeah, Romanian guns have had a long history. There have been a few importers. Even IO brought in some of the PSL type guns. But Century has been the dominator of this market for years outside of parts kits. Unfortunately, that does sometimes give Romanian guns a bad name because they see Century on it. They think it's a Century build. The old rule of thumb is Century imports are fine, even good. It's the Century builds, you kind of have to watch out for. One thing I'd like to say, when the Wasser was kind of at its peak, a lot of people dogged on it. But then Robski and others did videos, and then it became great. And these days it has almost a mythical status. I do wish the internet wasn't a pendulum. I wish it wasn't either extreme from dog shit to amazing. The truth is, these are good guns. And they were good guns at a great value at a lower price point years ago. Especially when they came with all the extras and accessories. Like when I got the paratrooper, it came with 4 mags and a pouch and everything. These days, I wouldn't say the price is all that great, but the current Wasser 10 is still a good gun. Yeah, nothing's too extreme. But we've seen it with Chinese guns, we've seen it with Serbian guns, we've seen it with arsenals sometimes. I even remember a time when some people didn't think so highly of Russian Izhmash Segas, believe it or not. Oh well, but I would say this. Read everything on the internet, sure. But take it all, even what I say, with a grain of salt. Because what'll happen is 1 or 2 bad apples, 1 or 2 lemons can taint an entire product line for the internet, an entire brand name. Because, if you sell 100 guns and 98 of them run fine, and those guys might make 1 or 2 posts, maybe a video saying, hey, my gun works great, and that's it. It goes in the safe. But those 2 guys that got a bad gun, they're going to make several posts, possibly several videos, and it's going to be something that becomes magnified. And the other people are going to repeat their stories. And then if you're not careful, you're going to think, no, there weren't just 2 bad guns, but 4, 6, 8, 20. Because when the story gets repeated over and over and over, it seems like there are more than there actually out there. That's not to say there aren't lemons. It's just to say that it gets kind of thrown out of whack. And at one point in time, the Wasser was the victim of that. These days, other guns have that heaped upon them because it seems like the internet always has to have a hero and a villain. There's always some gun on the ascendancy and some gun that's kind of on the decline that everyone's dogpiling on. And I'm not saying either one is or isn't deserved necessarily. Again, just approach everything with a little bit of skepticism and an open mind. And if you're in manufacturing, you know this. But if you're not into manufacturing, yeah, realize that nothing made by man, nothing mechanical, will ever be 100% perfect. So, yeah. And also, as much as I have talked about cost, saying what something should cost is kind of pointless. Things cost what they cost. We don't get to set prices based on what we think things should cost. Yeah, so they simply are what they are. But with that, let's wrap things up. Last mag with the SAR-1 at dark. No flash hider. Wolverine. Alright, folks. Well, there you have it. There's always more to be said, I know. Just felt like talking about it. On this AK World channel, I've been kind of reposting some older Romanian videos. That seems to be kind of the pattern I'm falling into. I'll post a chunk of videos dedicated to a gun from older times and then do an update video here and now. At least until I kind of build up the library. I consider just dumping all the videos at once on this channel, but I think it's better to do a few every day and then pause when I do a new video like this to give time. But let me know what you think. The Romanian guns are certainly neat and have a long history here, but I have to wonder if their prime years have come and gone. I guess we'll find out. Anyway, as always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Help out on Patreon. Check out the main Mishaco channel. And check back on this channel as I continue to do more AK work. This is Misha, and I'm going to go take a rest.